Thank you for joining us again for the Corporate Governance Institute's webinar series 2021. My name is Fergal, and today's topic, sales positions are the hardest to fill for employers today, globally. If that's not on your board agenda, it should be. This week's webinar will be hosted by Alan Maguire, who has been a director of several international companies from startup to public company. He is the co-founder and CEO of the Entrepreneurial Sales Institute, which was established to address the global shortage of sales skills today. Alan will be joined by the co-founder of the Corporate Governance Institute and Stephen Comey, head of content for the Corporate Institute, also for a panel discussion. We have 100 delegates registered for today's webinar from 15 different countries, so thank you all for attending again. Before we start, if you have a question, please use the chat box and it'll be answered throughout today's webinar. So I'll now hand over to Alan, and thanks again for joining us.
Thank you very much, Fergal, and thank you CGI and Anthony, Stephen, colleagues, and particularly those of you who joined us this afternoon, or whatever time it may be around the world. It's fantastic. I think we've such a global audience. It's a real privilege to speak to you today, and I hope we're going to have a pretty engaging session. One thing I'd emphasize from the outset as I run through the agenda is that this is really designed to be interactive. So while I have a few short slides to introduce you to maybe set a context for this discussion, from the very get-go, we'd love it to be as interactive as possible. So fire your thoughts and questions into the chat, and do engage as much as you possibly can. We want to make it as lively as possible. It's not a lean back session. Do lean forward and contribute whatever you can. I have a few slides. We want to make the bulk of the session a Q&A. So delighted to field your questions. And then there'll be a brief chat later from our colleagues at CGI about their diploma program, etc. So without further ado, I actually want to start by asking a few questions of my own while you ponder the ones you want to fire at me. And these are going to be quick. We're not going to dwell too much on them, but what I'd love to do is get in the chat, if you can, not spending really any more than 5 seconds thinking about it. I'd love to get a couple of quick fire inputs from you as a group of listeners and as an audience. And the first thing is going to be that game of word association. So apologies, that's the first thing I'll do is make sure my phone is turned off. What I want to do is in 5 seconds or less for you to pop into the chat, what's the first thing that you think of when I say the word sales? And this could go to personal experience, it could go to anything that you've experienced before, boardroom experience, but please just throw in as quick as you possibly can anything that you have there in that. And I see some coming in already. Please keep at it. Great. Okay. Okay, it's so hard to manage there. That I can resonate with that one. It's stressed. Okay, brilliant. Second question I have for you is on a scale of 0 to 5, how would you rate as a priority the importance of the function of sales to a business? And I love overrated. We got a lot of 5s there. That's fantastic. Brilliant. Okay, that's really helpful to start with. Wonderful. And then the final one is, how many of you out there, because I got a lot of connections on LinkedIn since this was advertised, which I really appreciate. Please keep them coming. And most of the connections I got from this audience, from the CGI audience, was kind of, they had a lot of letters after their names, they had a lot of acronyms. These were highly qualified. You guys are a highly qualified audience. How many of you out there, this is yes or no, chose sales as a professional career choice? Okay, fantastic. That is really helpful. And do keep those answers coming. We'll keep the questions coming as well. And one of the things that's really interesting, just to set the scene for what I'm going to talk about today, is that we have this really interesting dichotomy, which we see all the time as organizations wrestle with this issue about an almost universal, in fact, I think a unanimous, apart from one very funny wag who said sales was overrated, a universal recognition that sales is a top priority for the business. And yet no one in this very esteemed, educated and skilled audience chose it as a career. I want to dive into that in a bit more detail. Really quickly, and I want to reassure you this isn't about ESI, but just to let you know why are we here and what do we do. ESI is a young business. It was founded to fix this shortage of sales skills today. We have a digital platform that develops and certifies sales skills today. And I say that advisedly. It is not a training provider, and that's a distinction we'd love to have the opportunity to talk with you about. We have curated a curriculum that targets relevant and complex skills to sales. And I'm going to talk an awful lot more about that at a generic level. It is a work-based platform. This is about people learning on the job. You don't lift your sales team off the floor to do this program. And we go way beyond any notion of smiley face surveys and learning outcomes. We're focused on behavioral change and higher business performance. So that just gives you a feel for what it is that ESI provides to employers globally. And we'd love the opportunity to talk to you about that if this resonates. But on to the meat of the presentation. And what you'll have seen from what we sent out is that, and I'm guessing this definitely is going to be on your board agendas, and if it isn't, it will be very soon, is that talent broadly is the top emerging risk, according to Gartner, that organizations face globally. And my guess is that many of you are wrestling with that at board level right now. But what you may not be wrestling with underneath that broad theme is the fact that actually sales positions are the hardest roles for employers to fill. We're being very faithful to Manpower here, because that's that headline, that statistic comes from an annual report that Manpower produces. And the actual hardest positions to fill are the trades, plumbers, electricians, carpenters, joiners, etc. But on the assumption that not many employers here, or not a majority, will be in the construction or in the area of trades, that means that sales roles are probably the hardest roles that your organization finds to fill. And that's not well known. And you think, for example, about a lot of the hype around coding and STEM and technical skills, and how often does the global shortage of sales skills register on your board agenda or in your discussions globally? And that's illustrated by a whole range of statistics. I'm going to draw your attention at a generic level to the one at the top left of the screen, and the enormous disconnect between what one might call the global Victorian education system and the graduates it produces, who might know quite a bit in some cases, but they're not especially skilled for employability, and the disconnect between how employers and employees view their readiness for the workforce versus how universities feel they produce employable people. And underneath that, the sales skills dynamic is even more acute. And again, there's lots of statistics here that highlight how expensive this problem is for businesses. I'm guessing every one of your organizations will feel the same way. But look at the difference in turnover between the sales function in your organization, if it's typical, and other functions in the organization. 2 to 3 times the number of people turnover in an organization annually versus other functions. And before you get to some of the performance issues that might generate from a commercial perspective, think about the simple cost of that. And again, think about the comparison here between sales as a function and other functions, and why would that be the case? And why would your organization preside over that? And there's a real simple reason for that. I don't know how much this is going to resonate with people, but nobody, and you validated this by saying that this very esteemed audience that I'm talking to today chose sales as a career. We recognize it's probably the most important function in the business, and nobody had any aspiration to do it. And if you think about how you made your career choices, think about how you pass those career choices and your advice on to the next generation of people. How many of us relish the prospect of our children saying they want to be a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant or an engineer? And how many love it when they say, I want to be a salesperson? So deep down, ingrained in our DNA as a society, is this lack of respect and appreciation for sales as a profession. And one of the reasons for that is because those early perceptions, that natural instinctive perception, is rooted in decades-old norms and tropes. If you go back to the fact that sales has evolved profoundly in the last 30 to 40 years, even the last 10, if you go back in time, it has never been a career or a profession. Sales was the thing that people ended up doing because they couldn't do anything else. They were for, lots of people mentioned the word extrovert earlier on, they were for the people who can get on with people. Not high skilled at all, crude job, pretty unsophisticated. And over the last decades, that has changed in a material way. With the advent of technology in the 70s and 80s, you began to see employers like IBM and Xerox recognize the sophistication of the sales skill set and actually educate and train people for that skill set. In the 90s and 2000s, you had the emergence of professional buyers. So this notion of shoving product down people's throat was gone. Professional buyers were more sophisticated than that. And salespeople needed to be more sophisticated to be able to navigate that world. But when you overlay what's happened in the last 10 to 15 years, The skill of selling has evolved at a profound rate with the advent of sales and marketing technologies, the digitalization of this. And if you overlay on top of that the notion that every single one of your salespeople right now is probably operating from a bedroom or virtually, the premium on that sales skill set is profound. But in the background, what hasn't happened there is any evolution of sales education to keep pace with that change. So think for a second about why you didn't choose sales as a career option. Well, because you can't go and learn it anywhere. There's no sales degree anywhere. You don't go to university and learn sales. You can go to university and learn every single other business discipline that's out there, but there's nowhere for somebody to aspire towards and accumulate a sophisticated skill set that is required to sell successfully today. I'm going to illustrate this with a little bit of detail, which I hope is okay, but you'll get the bigger picture when I go through this. When we were designing the curriculum that ESI develops, the key thing for us was, why is this such an issue? Why are existing solutions not capable of developing the skills that employers need in their salespeople today? And we analyzed and curated thousands of employers' job specs for sales roles to see, well, what do employers want their salespeople to be able to do? What qualifications do they want them to have that they struggle to be able to see them to find? So what I'm going to show you is something that is a real life example of a sales job spec from an American multinational that actually it's an entry-level sales role. This is not a sophisticated sales role, but this is a very real spec. It's lifted from the internet, but it's emblematic and representative of organizations all over the world. We're not picking on this as some sort of extreme example. This is exactly what we see with employers all over the world all the time. And what you'll find in this spec is all the stuff that you would expect, and I'm guessing all the things that you think that your salespeople do all the time. So you'll notice that you've got what we call the motherhood and apple pie of a sales job spec. You need your salespeople to be able to follow up on leads. Ho hum, everybody does that. They got to be able to do demonstrations. Yeah, we got it. Draft contracts, write proposals, update your CRM system. I'm sure even for those of you who aren't in sales, that's going to resonate as being, well yeah, sure, that's all those guys do. But the really fascinating thing about this spec isn't really what they want the salespeople to do. And this is an entry-level sales role paid probably at about $35,000 to $40,000 a year. Look at the qualifications, and I emphasize the word, the qualifications is this company's word, not ours, that they want those salespeople to have. Now, I'm not going to list these or enumerate them. I'll give you a few seconds to read them and digest them. But think for a second about the sophistication and complexity of the skill set that is aggregated in this job spec. My particular favorites at the bottom, where they want these people going into an entry-level sales role to be able to do the relatively functional things that they want above, to be able to ideate editorial sensibility. Personally, if I could understand what that was, I'd be doing something very different as a profession in the first place. But think about the ability for the world out there to find anybody. I'm going to ask anybody on this call to consider, do you have all the skills that are identified and listed there? So forget about the mismatch between the skills that are required and the actual role I want somebody to conduct. But just look at how an employer, a very well-established employer, American, looking at developing a global sales team. Look at how they have publicly memorialized the skills they demand of their salespeople, they want their salespeople to have. And before we get too judgmental or too much of a laugh, I guarantee you this is not an outlier. This is representative of what we see with our customers day in and day out. So when you internalize that, you begin to think about, well, that's what I want my salespeople to be able, the skills I want them to have. You have a very fundamental question to ask as a board. Do our salespeople have those skills or not? And what we really fundamentally have then, as a micro example of the macro development and evolution of sales skills in the last 30 to 40 years, is you have this evolution of thinking about what I want my salespeople to do, but actually thinking much more about how I want them to think, how I want them to be able to navigate the world of work today. And we'll talk about this in a much broader context than sales before we wrap up the presentation. Why does that matter? Well, this is why this is a board issue. This is what we call the 24-month rule. And I don't want to go into too much detail, but this is a good typical life cycle of a sales professional. It takes 9 to 12 months to find and attract a salesperson into your business, and before they are even going to begin to contribute from a performance and a productivity point of view. And if you keep them for 24 months, they might begin to pay back the investment that you're making. But that's only for the guys who deliver and stick around. If you start introducing people who may not produce, it's going to take you those 9 to 12 months before you begin to see that level of production or not. And it will take another 9 to 12 months while you identify the fact they're underperforming, while you work out what you're going to do about it, while you decide to get them to leave the business, and while you find a replacement for that business, for that person when you decide to do that. So there's a possibility that every time you bring a salesperson into the organization, 24 months could elapse, either before they're paying you back, or worse, before you find that they're not paying you back and before you replace them. That is not an HR issue, folks. That is a boardroom issue that needs to be elevated up your list of priorities, because the cost to an organization of this, and it happens all the time, is enormous. So as I talk about this being more of a board issue than a management issue, think about this vicious circle that employers all over the world are finding right now. And think about this in the context of sales being the hardest roles to fill, that there simply is not enough sales talent or sales skills out there to be able to hire. First of all, do we believe as a board that sales is important? And going back to our first question this morning, or second question this morning or this afternoon, the answer is a resounding yes. Pretty much everybody in this call rated a priority 5 out of 5. Do we believe it requires a complex skill set? Well, perhaps today, by looking at how another employer is publicly memorializing that skill set, you might have a slightly different view about the fact that, wow, these guys actually are quite skilled when they go and produce their numbers month after month, quarter after quarter. If it requires a complex skill set, then the simple question is, do our people have this skill set? Are we finding people with that skill set, or do the people we already have that skill set? And what we find when we're holding these kind of questions up to our customers is, well, actually the answer is probably not, or very few of them do. If they don't have that skill set, what are you going to do with them? You've decided it's a complex skill set that's required to perform this function to a level of high performance. Well, are you going to develop those people if they don't have those skills, or are you going to fire them? And if you fire them, from what talent pool are you going to find their replacement? You're going to find their replacement from exactly the same talent pool that you found these people in the first place, which we've already identified globally is shrinking and not skilled enough in the first place. But you can't get away from the fact that sales is important and critical to the growth of your organization. And it's this vicious circle that we believe at ESI elevates this shortage of sales talent and skills way beyond the sales leadership realm, way beyond the HR realm, but into the fundamental board realm as being a critical business issue. And just to elevate the conversation away from sales for a second and perhaps make it even more board relevant, Gartner, our friends in Gartner have come out with their own view of the future of work post-COVID. And this is a future of work issue, not a sales issue. So what we find is that in this broad talent strategy, when you look at 5, 10, 15 years, that the skills you need your employees as a body to have, there is an emergence of these cross-functional, what are called transversal skills that you require people to have. That emergence of those skills is at a premium now in a post-COVID universe. This post-pandemic world is accelerating the premium on all your employees having those skills. And look at how critical the point in the middle is, that Gartner's identifying that these critical transversal skills are not just synonymous with roles. They are skills you need across functions in your organization, which again talks to the fact that this needs to be core to your board agenda and core to your board's strategic thinking. So I'll wrap here before we get into the Q&A. I hope that seeded a few questions. I see a few coming in. I can't quite read them quickly. But the 3 things I'd ask you to leave the room with today, which I hope is beneficial and valuable to you as you take this back to your businesses and your worlds. You know, our talent, and when we think about talent, we think about skills. In our world, we especially think about sales skills. Are these issues on your board agenda? If they are, how seriously are you treating them? If they're not, why are they not? And what might you do about that? Are these seen as just being an HR issue? Leave that to the VP of talent, leave that to the exec team. Or are these seen as being a critical business issue that could be one of the biggest impediments to growth that you might face as an organization? How seriously are you treating them? And then what kind of metrics might you begin to think about considering as a board to see if you're making headway, just like you would with any board issue or board agenda? What kind of metrics are you looking at to see if you're making any headway into this as a strategic or a business issue for the board? I'm going to pause there for a second. I'll leave them there for people to reflect on. I hope I haven't gone too fast. I hope we've seeded some ideas for you guys. My contact details are on the right. It's a real pleasure to meet you all virtually. Lots of people have engaged with us on social media. Please do all connect. We'd love to meet you. And if any of these issues are resonating with you, we'd love to talk to you about them as an organization as well. So I'll pause there. Anthony, Stephen, Fergal, I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, Alan. So why don't I kick off? For those people who don't know me, my name is Anthony Quigley. I'm one of the founders of the Corporate Governance Institute. So thanks a million, Alan. That's a really interesting presentation. Some great stats, some great numbers, but great insights into, what a lot of us understand, which is sales. We know that sales is important, but we can't figure out how to actually, monetize that or put it into concrete terms. So what I want to do is just ask a few questions. Let's start with breaking society or businesses up into three groups. There's the large companies, the Googles and the IBMs and the Microsofts. There's the SMEs, shall we call them, and then there's startups. So if we kind of get rid of or push away the IBMs and the big ones, because they seem to have it sussed. Am I right in thinking that? Like inside sales came along and you described the evolution of sales. And I think, I worked with, not for IBM, but with IBM on their inside sales teams. And they moved from being a company which had a ton of salespeople with their, perfectly pressed shirts, red tie, blue suit, going out with their briefcase, closing $1 million deals, to inside sales guys being sitting on the phone, never moving from their office in Dublin or wherever it is, closing $5 million worth of business. So they seem to have that sorted. Am I right about that in general?
So 3-4 years ago, Anthony, when we were looking at this as a business opportunity, I would have agreed with you completely. So we'd a fundamental hypothesis when we were building the curriculum for the business that this is a small company problem. This is not a big multinational company problem. These guys have sales licked, and even if they don't have sales licked, they've got all these other traditional training providers that are going to fix that problem for them. So there's nothing to see here. One of the biggest revelations we had in our journey was a unanimous, and I mean unanimous, as we did our market due diligence, we got told again and again and again, don't ignore the enterprise, don't ignore the enterprise, don't ignore the enterprise. They have the same problem and they don't know how to fix it. And what we found was a couple of things that are really fascinating from a big company perspective. One is a recognition that this skill set of selling is evolving, right? So that's the first thing. And what you have to remember with the bigger organizations is that you're talking about sales forces of thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of people. So they need high performance across the board. They need high performance to scale. So if they have any skills deficiencies at all, they need to address it. And they recognize that actually the evolution of this sales skill is real. And we want people to have these more entrepreneurial skills. As one multinational customer said to us, what company doesn't want an entrepreneurial sales force? Yes. So you will find exactly the same dynamic, that multinationals are looking for the same skills in their salespeople that earlier stage businesses are, but they're not finding them.
Okay.
The other thing, and this is I think something that's crystallizing in real time, is that if you went back as recently as 10 years, forget about the decades-old evolution of sales that I talked about earlier on. I remember well, as a sales professional, I remember kind of looking into the abyss with all the talk about the death of a salesman and salesperson in the late noughties, the arrival of HubSpot, the arrival of sales and marketing tech, the sales tech stack, automation, orders will come tumbling in, everything just happens automatically. I will never hire another salesperson. And I read those headlines and I read the blog posts and I read the theses. And actually the exact reverse has occurred. The digitalization of sales as a role has actually made the skill set requirement higher, not made it more redundant. So what you've done is you've created a much more complex digital environment salespeople have to work in. You've got much more educated and sophisticated buyers who are also educated digitally as well, by the way. So they're coming to the table with far greater demands and expectations of what process they're expecting when they engage with a vendor. And it doesn't matter whether that vendor is a small company or a large company. So not only has the skill of selling evolved in the last 10 years, but because organizations thought, I'm not going to need these people in 10 years anyway, they haven't invested in it. And so you've got a bit of a perfect storm accruing there. And that storm, I can tell you, absolutely validated in our marketplace, is universal, irrespective of size of the company, small or multinational, it's exactly the same.
Okay, that's really interesting. So the problem exists across all companies. And there's a question in here from Gus Collins about startups, because that's where I was going to go next, which is, you often hear of startups who fail because they haven't sold anything. And that's, that's quite often why a lot of startups just don't make it, is because they've created what they believe is a great product, but they have actually forgotten to sell anything. And Gus asks, how can a small startup company attract a salesperson and have them contributing positively within 3 to 6 months? Because you're suggesting it might be a 24-month return on investment. So do you want to comment on that?
There's a couple of things there, right? So, and this is going to sound horribly basic, but what I would say to you, first of all, is that in a startup context, one of the first steps that they can take, and this is going to sound a little bit philosophical, is actually to respect the function in the first place. I've seen so many startups over the years, and their first sales hire is the brother-in-law or the nephew who worked in a shop when they were a teenager and got on well with people. And the notion is that we invest really heavily in all these other functions in a startup up front. So we're prepared to invest in really expensive coders and really expensive technicians, and we're prepared to invest in some really in sophisticated technology stack.
Yeah.
But because we've done that, we don't need this over here. We'll completely reduce our investment in sales, because these orders are going to tumble in, aren't they? So first of all, you've almost got a recognition of parity here. It is actually as hard to sell something as it is to build it. And in fact, actually, to provoke that even further, one of the lenses when we were developing our curriculum we looked at was, well, why is it so easy to sell for IBM versus a startup? And actually, guys, not only is selling hard to start with, but go out there and sell with no clients, with no revenue, with no brand, with no lead generation, with no marketing function, and with no case studies. That makes it a little bit harder. So actually, the first thing you got to do is actually respect the discipline in the first place, and then work out how much am I prepared to invest in it. And why wouldn't I invest as much in a sales effort as I would in a developer or a technologist? Moving aside from that philosophical question, really your salesperson in a startup is not going to be any use unless you're generating leads. And Anthony, you know this better than anybody. So really your first level investment has got to be in some sort of marketing mechanism that's going to get some inbound leads the salesperson can actually sell. And what's fascinating at that startup level is a lack of understanding of what sales actually is. And the amount of times, and it'd be fascinating around in the audience, if we had a room here, we could start Q&Ing people, is how often the words sales and marketing are interchanged. And how often people mistake marketing activity for sales activity. Much of what that sales technology stack evolution the last 10 years has been about really is making people that you call salespeople marketing operators, lead managers, prospectors. That's not sales. Sales is delivering a number every single month and every single quarter on time. It's a different skill set. And so startups need to recognize the skill set and the importance of it, but they also need to have kind of realistic expectations. Am I producing leads for this? Do I understand I want the person to bring business in, not nurture things at the top of the funnel? I need them to close business. And therefore, what kind of beast am I looking for? So there's a bigger question than just how do I find great salespeople? But it starts with what you're prepared to invest in it.
Okay, lots of questions coming in here, and I'm going to try and get to those, Alan. But one of the things there is the recognition of the sales attributes and the sales function, and how can let's bring it back to our audience, which is how can a board actually bring that forward? Is there a change of language required? Is there a change of mindset required? At the board level, what can be done? And let's move it, just move it on from startups to SMEs, because most of our customers are SMEs. There's a few larger companies, but how can they elevate that thought process?
So there's a couple
board
of
level
there, Anthony, right? And if there's a couple of themes emerging, but the first thing I'd say is that let's think about, let's move, I'll come back to sales in a second, but let's think about talent and skills and people generally, right? So the first question is the board concerned with that at all? And in our view, and I'm guessing many people on the call here will recognize that actually is something that the board will get to on an occasional period every year. That talent and the future of work, it's very topical right now. I'm sure boards are wrestling with, well, what are we going to do with our office space? Well, they should also be wrestling what are we going to do with our people. Okay, that's probably more important post-COVID than what we're going to do with our office space. So you have fundamentally, are you thinking about talent and people and skills as a driver of the business going forward? So if you're crossing that hurdle, that's the first thing. Before you get to sales, let's think about that. Are you even thinking about that? And do you recognize that as being important? If you're already past that line, if you've crossed that line, then the question is, well, why wouldn't you think about sales in the same way you would think about other functions? So let me give you a few examples. Boards, and rightly so, and going back to the history here and the natural perceptions people have of sales, boards have a very binary relationship with the sales function because sales is a very binary function. There's no other function really in the business that when it gets to the boardroom table has a red or a green light as starkly as sales does. So the culture and the engagement level is very binary. You know, after finance, what are we going to talk about? We talk about sales. Is it red or is it green? Are we on track or not? If it's red, the solution is typically as binary as the result. Well, kind of fire them, move them on. Who's not performing? Let's look for the lowest common denominator and move them on. I don't think they talk about any other function like that. So that's a bit of a kind of a historical legacy about how boards treat sales as a function. So if you're dealing with talent in the round, the question is, why would you look at sales any differently than you look at other talent in the organization? Would you hire underqualified finance function that doesn't know how to perform the finance? Well, no, you wouldn't. Would you hire people who couldn't code to write your code? Well, no, you wouldn't. So why are you consistently hiring people who don't have the right skills to sell? Yeah. And then taking the decision, well, I'm going to move them on now because they obviously can't sell, I'll fire them. Well, every other function, when you find they've got development requirements, typically going to invest in developing them. So you first of all got the broad recognition of talent as a critical business driver. And secondly, have we got parity of treatment of all the different functions? So we're not looking for something exceptional for sales here. Just process your decision making around the sales function in the same way you would around any other function of the business.
So one of the things I suppose that you mentioned, by the way, was sales funnel. And you said top of the funnel, and you just rolled off your tongue. Now I know exactly what that is. And we were using terms like, when you and I meet, we use terms like CPA, CPL, and so on. And we'd be very happy with those. And they're terms that we use in marketing. And, CPA is cost per acquisition, CPL, cost per lead. Do we need to introduce language at board level to help people understand what is being discussed? Because, we try and introduce technology terms. We try and introduce finance terms. We introduce culture and diversity. Should we be introducing that kind of terminology, or is that too detailed?
Yeah, I'm reminded of a presentation when I was actually running a business where I got to the production part of my presentation, and one of the directors actually fell asleep. So there's a risk of getting into too much detail here. I think I don't think detail is necessarily a board's friend, and part of the difficulty even with going into the job spec today isn't to say you need to understand what all these skills requirements are. I think it's how you elevate that to a more strategic level, and so I think there's definitely room. I don't think a board needs to understand how code is written to understand the economics of producing a product that's going to be profitable in a technology context. But there probably is a need to understand, without getting into funnel language, etc., is just getting a bit closer to the semantics around marketing and sales, and how they're not the same thing. And it is astonishing how often somebody will talk about sales and they'll be talking about marketing. So even understanding what sales actually is, as opposed to being a number your VP of sales is reporting on every single month. And then perhaps getting under the bonnet of the economics of it. And the economics of it as a function, in the same way you get to the grips with the P&L of every other function of the organization, and cost centers and profit centers, etc. That begins to flush out some of the granular issues that really your executive team and your management team should be able to fix, but you need to be able to meet them halfway about what that means for business performance. So I don't think detail works at a board level at all. I don't know what our audience would think about that, but a greater understanding and willingness to understand sales in a more potentially meet the executive team halfway about what's really involved here, as opposed to the fact that, again, think about the misalignment here between the sales is really important to business, but it's not something that's aspirational or sophisticated. The infantry is out there, and if they're no good, we'll send them over the top and we'll shoot them. That doesn't reconcile with the fact this is the most important function of the business. So just how do you align that, and how do you meet your exec team halfway in terms of wrestling with that?
Okay. I'm going to ask one more question, and then Stephen, do you want to jump in? I saw you taking some notes, so you might want to jump in. But I'm going to ask the question that Patrick O'Mara asked, and then I might move back to the one that Louise Lonergan asked. But Patrick has asked, are there organizations that you know, large or small, who you believe are leaders on the approach as you describe it? So leading with sales, I presume, and you know, high quality, high value, high achieving sales organizations, as opposed to just highly technical.
Yes. So let's, one thing as I get all kind of wholesome and strategic about this, which you kind of need to do in the boardroom, is I don't want to dilute for a second the fact that sales is about delivering a number every single month. So
Yes.
so let's start with a simple answer to that question, which is your organization delivering its number? In which case, kind of the really simple question is, you don't have a problem.
Yeah.
And we come across organizations all the time who are knocking the number out of the park, and therefore, ergo, they don't have a problem. And in the traditional way of looking at it, they don't, right? So this is very much about saying, okay, well, there are organizations out there that are knocking the number out of the park every month, so they don't have a problem, do they? Well, actually, you get back to this kind of skills requirement, and are they insuring themselves against the kind of the ability to scale exponentially over future periods and future years? And that's where you get under the bonnet of that. So what we do see, if you move beyond, are there organizations that are in the exemplar? Well, any organization that's meeting its numbers or beating its numbers is in the exemplar. So off you go. You know, there's nothing to see here. But even for those organizations, when you go under the bonnet, you do get to closer to this, and it's a very evolving picture of recognition that I go back to the illustration that I used, that actually you've identified the fact you want your people to have these skills, and they don't have them. And you're not getting them from universities and graduates, and you're typically not getting them from the kind of millennial workforce, even people with some job experience or work experience. You typically still have the sales turnover issue and the cost to the organization of that. So answer is, if you're knocking your sales numbers out of the park, you're good to go, off you go, nothing to see here. But actually, even if you are, let's look underneath that and see how insulated are you from continuing to be able to do that. And organizations are recognizing this evolution of sales skills, as I showed in the job spec. But the bit that they're not over the line yet with is, and we've only met one in I'm not going to name them, but one multinational organization in 5 years of looking at this, who said, I'm not interested, talk to the hand, I'm knocking it out of the park, I'm happy. And every other organization is looking for people with these skills. And when we say to them, well, are you getting people with those skills? They go, no. When we ask them, what are you doing about that? They're kind of staring back at us with a blank face. And if they're knocking the numbers out of the park, they can live with that. And they can live with it probably until this skills deficit begins to hit them. But having recognized the fact you want people with these skills, if you're not getting them, then either you're wrong to want them, or if you're right to want them and you're not getting them, that's going to come and hurt you at some point in the future. So you got to start thinking long term about it.
Okay.
Yeah, this is it's fascinating, Alan, and I think, you know, the big point that stands out for me is, you know, the talent and the skills required to be a good salesperson versus the perception out there. And I think Derek Bell in the chat makes a point, you know, how you recommend we change the language of sales. And I suppose my question is, you know, how do we make it an attractive career option?
And the really corny answer, Stephen, is that's what we're trying to do. That's our mission, is to elevate, is to professionalize sales and make it something aspirational. Look, the first thing is, what we're seeing is this recognition, even if organizations don't understand it and realize it, that what you're looking for from these people is a pretty sophisticated skill set. That's a good place to start. But actually, I think that talks again to the wider talent agenda, and that organizations are realizing that I need people with these broad, what the industry calls transversal skills. So that dialogue is probably happening in boardrooms. And I think that the simple reality is, if you're recognizing that as an organization across functions, don't exclude sales from that. In fact, you know, include sales in the fact that not only are they as the same as every other function requiring those skills, but they probably need them more and more urgently to be able to operate at a level of high performance. But we talk to organizations about how on the one hand, you've got to fix this at two sides of the coin, and this is very much our mission. And let me use coding as an example, actually, to highlight this. One of the fascinating things that we learned about this challenge is that if you think about the upskilling and reskilling dynamic that's emerging post-COVID, and the need for people to change careers and social mobility and career mobility, etc. It is amazing how you think about the retail marketplace and individuals. When you wake up in the morning and decide, whether it's because of COVID or not, I want to reskill, I want to upskill. Is anybody saying I want to become a salesperson? No, absolutely not. Are they saying they want to become a coder? Yeah. You know, do I want to do I want to learn how to code? Do I want to do computer science? Do I want to get a computer programming job? Yeah. Why? Loads of hype about it. Loads of hype about the skills shortage. But also it will get you a job, right? And what's really interesting is, to get a coding job, I have to be able to code. So I know if I will go for a coding interview today, they'll know within 90 seconds I can't code, I won't get the job. The fascinating thing with sales is it's not aspirational yet, but I can get a sales job without the required skills. People hire me without the skills. So interestingly, when we talk to employers, the two sides of the coin we have to fix. First of all, is the skills deficit after employment. That's kind of what we target first. But the much more interesting long-term picture for us is the supply side that you're referring to. And how do we elevate? How do we get the bridge between employers, for example, talking to education providers, talking to us, talking to their education partners, raising the profile of sales as a skills shortage domain, and that education institutions begin to provide graduates with the skills that can do it. And I think there's a whole load of ingredients in that. It's not easy to wave a magic wand and suggest people get aspirational. And I'll actually start, by the way, guys, with the disconnect in this room and the questions I started with, and in fact the next generation down. And I've children myself, by the way, but we all recognized up front that this is the top priority function of the business. And yet how many people choose it as a career? And how many people would advise the next generation down to choose it as a career? The most important function, you know, if you want to start using sporting analogies, the striker on the football team. Well, how many people tell you to go and be a defender? You know, how many kids grow up wanting to be a defender as opposed to wanting to score goals? And yet we shield them from that. We send them off down other professions. Why, if it's the most important function of the business, are we not promoting it as the most, or as attractive a career option as any other career option that a child might have?
Okay. So Louise Lonergan has asked a question about she's trying to build a great sales funnel using ActiveCampaign, which is like HubSpot, and you have good examples of what high-level pipeline should look like. So maybe I should take that question and expand it a little bit further and say, well, what in the boardroom can the boardroom do to help the CEO and therefore the senior executive team do in order to build out a sales funnel, sales pipeline, and understand what it means to be a selling company? And is there a like, how do you learn that? Is there a process?
So we're very much focused on B2B sales. So in the first instance, let's differentiate between those two, because I think B2C sales is a different beast altogether, and I wouldn't dream of claiming to have any expertise in that regard. I think that the fascinating strategic thing about this is very much related again to talent, skills, and automation. And when I look at the traditional sales funnel, but I don't want to get too technical, Anthony, and I know this will resonate with you, but that investment that I think you said Sinead is making in lead gen and sales, etc., and that is all relatively automatable. So when you think about sales, and again, we put it at the marketing end of the spectrum, and you think about, well, to what extent do we need a human being engaging with those leads as they get generated? It's interesting to look at what needs to happen to them and how do you monetize those leads. The closer you get down to closing a deal, you get into in business to business sales, and this is the difference with business to consumer. With business to business sales, there is still a journey, a buyer, a professional buyer, a procuring organization go on to put their signature on a contract, on a piece of paper that says, I'm going to buy something from you. And that journey typically requires a human brain to manage it, to navigate it. And that's where the salesperson comes in. So there is a and again, we obviously eat, sleep, and drink and breathe this, so we can go into a lot of detail. I'll try and keep it high level. But there is a point at which your buying organization, the organization who you want to buy your product, is going to want to engage with a human being, typically. There's exceptions to this, but broadly from a corporate procurement perspective, especially the bigger ticket, the item. So your question then is going to be, what experience do you want that organization to have? You've probably nailed the marketing experience and the branding and the messaging and the bit that gets them interested. But the journey to get them from that interest to signing the piece of paper is the hard bit. That's the bit that takes time. The lead coming in is fantastic. That can sometimes take time as well. But what's that experience going to be like? What's their journey going to be like? And do you or don't you need a human being to help navigate that journey? If you do, what kind of human being do you want to do that? And what kind of skills do you want them to have? And so there's a complexity there. But any notion it's all automated or the investment in automation you're making as a business is getting people down, and let's use percentages, any more than 50% of their sales journey is flawed. What you might think is a real life sales opportunity that's been generated automatically and processed digitally is, in a B2B context, is rarely more than, certainly rarely more than 50%. It's rarely more than 25% on the journey. So how are you going to get into the rest of it? Because that's the hard bit. That's where you monetize. That's the bit that matters.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because, you know, a lot of my skill set is in B2C, as you know, and B2C is you know, you can get a much higher percentage on B2C through automation and digital selling. But you're right, and I recall a previous company we sold to IBM, and out of the blue, you know, our marketing was digital, and we did get a lead via digital from IBM. And you know, a lead like that comes in, we might get hundreds of leads, and this one comes in and somebody just picks it up. It turns out that we sold them 2 million quid's worth of business, and it took 20 people or 10 people to actually close that and to bring it along. And it was a, you know, 12-month cycle followed by another 18 months worth of delivery. So it was a huge effort, but you're absolutely right in terms of the manpower required. That wasn't going to happen digitally. So it's you know, back to Louise's question about sales funnel. It really depends on the type of customer, the product being sold, the complexity of the product, the price point. You know, there's a myriad of inputs and criteria.
A great benchmark, and again, food for thought, I hope we're giving people today on the call, but a great benchmark is look at this through a different lens. And whether this is a board issue or not, look at your own procurement guidelines and regulations. At what ticket size do you need kind of committee engagement with the procurement decision? In your own organization, how big a purchase can somebody just go off and make on their own? Well, that's exactly the journey that your customers are going on. And once you engage that kind of committee-based procurement, once you think about how your organization is going to buy, think about the experience they need to have, not just to buy anything, but to buy your thing. Because remember, the bit that we're not even beginning to scratch the surface of here is not just the ability to sell, but the ability to sell better than your competitors.
Yeah. Let me just Stephen, you jump in with the last one, but I'm just conscious of the time. This is because you now go into an interesting area. You take a company like HubSpot. So HubSpot is a publicly traded marketing automation tool company, and they would consider that they're selling B2B. However, their price point is such that it might be anything from 300 euros or dollars per month to $3,000 per month. To sign off 40 grand's worth of software would take a committee. However, to sign off, you know, $2,000 worth per month might be an individual. And now what you've got is you've got a hybrid where you're spending a lot of money, but it's actually incremental. So and it's probably for this reason SaaS companies are so highly valued. Do you want to just comment on that kind of selling, Alan, for seconds?
Without a doubt. So this brings us neatly back to this. This is why it's such a knotty issue. And remember, we're starting with, if you're knocking the numbers out of the park, no problem. You're off and running. And HubSpot obviously it may well be doing that. I don't know enough about whether they're meeting their targets or not. But we're not. I mean, we're looking for. We philosophically, right, are looking for the most efficient sales journey possible. Our philosophy, the skills we develop, is about actually helping people get to the sale quickest, most efficiently, without wasting time. And if organizations can do that by pricing it in a particular way, by making it easier for the institution, the other side of the equation to buy, well, then off you go. And then if that's really your model, and if that's really your scalable model, and it's pretty much all automated, or think about a percentage, it's automated to 90% of it, then you really are at the top half of that job spec I talked about earlier on. You're looking for clerks, you're looking for order takers, you're looking for people just to kind of check the admin is right, and go for it. Well done, folks. If you can build a business with that level of investment in sales capability, you're off and running. The fascinating thing, and I don't want to speak for HubSpot because I haven't looked at it, but I'd welcome a chance to do it, is if that's the case, if you really are as slick as that, well, why do you want your salespeople to have all these sophisticated skills that you're looking for when you go and recruit them? And that's the disconnect. So if it is as slick and automated as that, if you really are looking at people just waiting for the orders to tumble in, you don't need sophisticated skills. You're probably in the minority, but fair play to you, we'd be the first people to applaud you. The point about it is, if you aren't in that minority, you either do or don't recognize that your people, your salespeople, need to have these skills. The question is why? What do you ask them to do? What are they trying to navigate out there in the world of business that requires those skills? And then how are you going to find people with them?
Okay. Stephen, do you have any final comments or questions?
Yeah, just a final thought. I mean, when you asked, at the beginning, Alan, what people thought when they thought of sales, one thing that popped into my head, good salespeople are very well paid. And from a communications perspective, you often don't see or hear the pay and bonuses that great salespeople can enjoy. Is this lack of communication on the part of the sales industry, or could it be used to create to recruit people to reskill?
It's a really so certainly when we think about, so again, to get a bit macro, Stephen. So to go, I don't to link this with your earlier question, when we think about fixing the supply side and how do you promote this as a career, for us, there's a really compelling argument to go to. Again, we think about career and social mobility. We have an advisory board called Global Sales Skills Council that has steered us in this direction about, well, when you look at people reskilling, upskilling, why can we not make this more attractive? Because it's a very well compensated role, as well as being an alternative to coding and a very highly skilled alternative to coding. So we definitely need to remind people rather than, I think, emphasize that how lucrative sales can be. But I don't think that's necessarily a message that the industry has struggled to put out there. If anything, it's part of the old-fashioned trope. If you're any good, if you deliver, you'll get paid loads. If you don't, you'll be fired. Now, I grew up in that environment and I'm well familiar with it. The question is, how long can that endure? And if you think about I get all my Gen Ys and Zs and millennials wrong, but if you think about today's workforce, and I'm thinking particularly people under 30 who employers are trying to attract into the business, I'm not sure if something as binary as, hey, you'll make loads of money or you'll get fired, is a particularly attractive recruitment or career option. I think it worked in the past, and particularly when sales was a more binary function. I think today's colleagues, this future of work dynamic, the future of skills, the post-COVID world, yes, people want to earn loads of money, but they want other things as well. They want to learn, they want career development, they want a pathway that goes beyond being fired if I don't deliver in 3 months. And I think there's a part of this that has to respond to saying, yes, you'll make loads of money, but we're also going to nurture your skills and develop them and turn you into a lifelong business professional. You may or may not stay in sales forever, and in the same way that lots of our colleagues in the call today aren't in law or finance forever. They've moved on to board level positions. Why can't sales be a similar kind of stepping stone to a broader business career? So I'm not sure anymore it's all about money. It is for some beasts, but I'm not sure it is for everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. Again, conscious of time, it's 6 minutes to 2. I think what we should do is think about wrapping up. Thank you very much, Alan, for your wise words. Really interesting. Certainly, there was a lot of activity on the chat. We couldn't get to everybody. Alan or Fergal, did you want to say a few words to close off?
Yeah, no, thanks so much, Alan, and thanks, Stephen. I just want to remind everyone. Our diploma in corporate governance commences actually today, but we have another course running on the 27th of May. So we have space there if anybody is interested. The diploma is designed and taught by highly qualified and experienced governance professionals, and you can contact me if you have any queries about that also. If the diploma is not an option for you at the minute, we also have membership for the Corporate Governance Institute. So as a member, you will gain access to practical knowledge, expert advice, and cutting-edge research and valuable network as well that you can gain access to. We have a lot of case studies, templates as well to help your organization benefit as well from your membership, and to make you have an easy life, I suppose. So if you'd like more details about that, it's available on our website. So just want to thank everyone again for joining us. And again, if you have any questions, please contact me. Alan, thanks so much for joining. Anthony and Stephen, thanks a million.
Great. Thanks a million, Fergal. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Stephen, for the input. Ayusha, thanks for the logistics. Okay, see you, folks. Any questions, just drop us an email at Corporate Governance Institute. We'd love to talk to you. Bye now.
Thank you, guys.